There's no red light come on yet.
It's on.
Hello, everyone. It's on. Hello, everyone. I'm here today. We're going to talk about today a specific part of the market in asset management, and hopefully it'll become clearer as we go along. And I'm going to talk to Pavlos Loizou, who'll tell you about himself in a minute about that. And Pavlos has got extensive experience in this area of asset management, and it's not the mainstream institutional market, or it is a specific type of institution, and Pavlos will tell us about that. So first, just kicking off, I'm going to ask Pavlos to tell us a little bit of himself and his background and his experience in this area of asset management.
Sure. Thank you, Pat. So I started off having graduated from Reading. I went on to Cambridge, where I did real estate finance. And then I went into the city working for CBRE in their valuations department. So I sort of started where probably many of the people on this course either are or are planning to be. I worked for 2-3 years in the city, and then in 2007 I moved to Romania because I decided to do something crazy with my life. So having never been to the country, not speaking Romanian, given that I'm Cypriot, I moved there to sell land, and I was doing that for 2 years. So I had a great time. But my lab has always been data and numbers and actually finance. So progressively, as I moved back to Cyprus, following the big depression in 2008, 2009, I set up an advisory business that mainly dealt with collecting data on the real estate market. And then as things were drying up on transaction activity, I moved into distressed real estate, collecting data about non-performing loans, and especially real estate-backed non-performing loans. So slowly but surely, I ended up teaming up with a company which is headquartered in the UK called Resolute Asset Management. At the time, we were only 2 in Cyprus. The guys out in London were about 13, 14 of them. And we started building this business together. To cut a very long story short, we started advising banks on how to restructure and how to manage these loans that started popping one after the other, where people were not able to repay them, either because they were developers who had gone bust, trading companies that where their turnover sunk and they were not able to make the payments. And you had all these buildings left empty or not well maintained or incomplete developments and so on and so forth. So that's where we went into. And then as time passed, I then moved on the buy side of this area, working for a private equity fund, indirectly working for them. I was working for Apollo Global Management, where they bought 2.7 billion of non-performing loans here in Cyprus, and we set up a management company, a servicing company, to manage these loans and distressed real estate on their behalf. And over the last 6 months, post-COVID, I decided to actually go back to what I love doing the most, which is setting up companies and dealing with data and software and those types of things. So I set up an advisory business called Wire FS, which is mainly in the prop tech area.
So just going back to asset management, then, why do you think this topic belongs in the asset management field? We've been talking about loans a lot there. Why is it so relevant for asset management?
Well, I think when you are at university, the majority of the discussion or what you are being taught is about commercial real estate, where everything is going great, and you sort of ignore residential, where the residential sector is actually bigger than the commercial. You talk almost nothing about land, so obviously that changes. But then the bit that nobody really talks about is what happens when things go wrong. I mean, nobody wishes for things to go wrong, but unfortunately, they often do. So it's actually a skill set to be able to manage during the downturn. I mean, it's very nice to have, let's say, if you were a mall operator 10 or 15 years ago, it was a great job to be. You had the mall, you had your anchor tenants, you had everybody wanting to be in your mall if you were in a good area or whatever. Okay, that's great. You have you're good at maintaining relationships, and maybe you are also good at negotiating some specific terms in a lease agreement. But now that not only COVID, but also the move to buying stuff over the internet has completely transformed that part of the retail industry, that same person can't actually manage that mall anymore. They simply don't know how. They were never geared up to do it in the first place. So, but what you do have is you have private equity funds, hedge funds, or high net worth individuals who take a look at these shopping malls or these non-performing loans that I was dealing with, which in many cases they are the same thing. And they come in and say, oh, well, hold on a minute. What if we buy this thing, which is, it's a mall at 60, 70% occupancy, so it's very low. Anything below 75, 80, things are already falling apart. And let's turn this thing around. So in the same way, this is what managing non-performing loans and distressed real estate is stepping in when things are falling apart and turning it around. Now, in many ways, that's more exciting than having a building that is fully let for, 10, 15 years and everything is fine, because what's the biggest drama you're going to face? That there's a crack on the window. That's not fun. So I prefer to dealing with big problems.
So can you tell us about, you have these large portfolios that the banks usually end up owning by accident, and what in your experience they do and what their options are?
Sure. First of all, let me say, how big is this thing? I mean, what are we really talking about? And right now in 2016, which is, and I'm saying 16 because that's when things, let's say it was before the boom, which started clearing up part of the market. So at that point in time in Europe, we had 1.1 trillion of non-performing loans. It's a big chunk that was sloshing around in the banking system.
Is that real estate or general?
General. This is general. The vast majority of that, I would say 70% is real estate or real estate related loans. So here we're talking about anything from credit card debt, car loans, student loans, but the bits that we deal with are loans to businesses where they mortgage effectively their offices or the industrial agreement they had, developers who bought land and have apartments they haven't sold, or the whole building hasn't been constructed, or of course retail buyers who mortgage their house or holiday home or whatever it was. So typically what happens is that you see banks historically, and even now, pre-COVID, they have about 2 to 3% non-performing loans. So basically, out of the total loans they give, usually you would have anything between 2 to 3% non-performing. And what non-performing loan, what it means is basically for the first 90 days, if you miss a payment, your loan is still fine, right? There's no problem. Everything is okay. Somebody's going to pick up the phone and say, look, is everything okay? Did you miss the payment? Sort of what's going on, and maybe they won't even call you. When you hit 90 days plus one, it falls into a bucket called 90 days overdue. Pretty self-explanatory. You haven't paid your loan for more than 90 days. So at that point in time, it's the first flag. And that moves the loan to what is called the early arrears bucket. So it's at that point in time when somebody in the bank, usually it's a bank at that point, will pick up the phone and say, look, what's happening? I haven't paid for 3 months. Do we need to talk? Do we need to restructure the loan? Or is it something more benign going on? If you don't start paying, and this does depend on the bank, then you are moved into another bucket. This is typically what happens, not always the case, but you move to another bucket where you are moved into the non-performing unit. So these are people within the bank, bankers, who specialize in sitting down with you. They will put on the screws and bring lawyers in or accountants in and start saying, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. So the threats begin, or the legalistic side of things begin. And then if that doesn't work in reaching a solution, at that point in time, you have moved into yet another bucket, which is called the recoveries bucket. So at that point in time, it means, we're done talking. We are either foreclosing on your company, on your assets, or we're putting the company into insolvency or into administration, whatever the case may be. At that point in time, assuming that the company doesn't have a value itself, so you have a developer who was basically just on land and buildings, so the business isn't there anymore. That real estate will end up in the real estate department or team of the bank, of the financial institution. They will manage them and push them out to agents and to sell them. Now, this sounds amazing, and the logical answer would be, okay, why doesn't that work? Well, I just described what happens in a 1 to 3% NPLs. When you go back to 2009 until 2012, 13, which isn't that far ago, you are talking about NPLs that reached in Southern Europe 50%. So half the loans in the banks were not performing, right? So, and that's really the problem. The system is geared up to cater for up to 3% of problems at a push 5, and then you end up with 50, and everything falls apart because where everybody in the bank is geared to making you happy, answering the phone when you have an issue with logging in, or you want a new loan or anything like that. The same people are now being asked to pick up the phone and actually not only be mean to you, which is that's the easy bit in a way, but also it's a whole different skill set, like we described earlier, about what you need to be able to see the opposite of person, possibly the same person you had a relationship with for the last 15, 20 years, where you gave them a loan to buy their first house, you gave them a loan to build to finance their building their warehouse, you gave them a loan to send their kids to school. And now you're sitting opposite them and saying, actually, I need to take all of this back, and maybe even make you or your uncle or whoever guaranteed these loans personally bankrupt.
But you need real estate skills to.
You need, because effectively what happens is that the market moves. I mean, let's assume a loan. I mean, in the UK, they give or they were giving 90 or even 100% LTV, loan to value loans. But so what you have there is that, so you gave $1 million. Let's say the collateral was 1.2 million. So, okay, you're good. But if real estate values drop by 40% or 50%, so there are 600,000, and the person sitting opposite you says, look, I'm bust, there's no business anymore, I'm out. Then the banker will turn around and say, well, hold on a minute, there's no business for me to deal with. There's no loan terms for me to restructure. I'm going to get my recoveries through the collateral, through what somebody has mortgaged. In this case, let's say it's that warehouse, which you thought, maybe you didn't think, maybe it was the right decision at the time, it was worth 1.2 million. 5-7 years down the line, it was 600,000. It has various town planning or other problems associated with it. Nobody has really maintained it for the last 4 or 5 years because the guy was trying to make ends meet. So, they weren't going to maintain the roof or anything like that. So the roof is leaking. Maybe they brought in some tenants and you don't know anything about them because they were trying to make some money on the side to actually make the payment. So the whole thing it ain't great. And this is what banks, so in answer to your first question, which is what do the banks do, is in the first instance, they try to go through the standard process that they have for the up to 3 to 5%. They try to do the same. But then very quickly what they end up doing is that what happens is that the system gets clogged up. They get too many loans ending up to be processed to the system. The people who are dealing with these loans are not the right people for the job because, as I said, they haven't done this thing before. They don't have the ethos and the business acumen to do it. So this is sort of,
we're talking about running the real estate or running the loans?
You're talking about running the loans first, and then once that kicks in, and you bring, usually they would bring in especially consultants, specialist consultants in who actually only do that. So you would fly in a restructuring team of either a big four firm or other companies that specialize in doing this type of loan restructurings. But then at the same time, you need let's say, people who understand the real estate side. And this is sort of how I started my career, because the issue that the financial institutions in Cyprus and Greece, where I have worked most of the last 10 years had, was that they would fly in these consultants, usually out of the UK and Ireland. And I say UK and Ireland because in the UK, these types of business going bust and turning the business around and the equivalent of Chapter 11 and so on and so forth, it had been going on for a while. Ireland, because it was one of the first countries to get hit in 2008, 2009 by the downturn, and then rebounded quite quickly. So they exported this skill set to other jurisdictions. But when these people fly in and they say, okay, I'm sitting opposite this developer to restructure their loans, and they turn around to a valuer, because that's the real estate consultant they have at hand, and they say, okay, what is this building worth? Well, the problem that they have is that the valuer will step in and they will say, I'm doing a red book valuation, and assuming this, blah, 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 it's this amount. And then then they look at them and say, well, this is the real world. There are no assumptions to be made, right? And I'm saying that because, having worked as a valuer, you can't make assumptions in this case, because it's not a case, I'm going to do a report, and if there is a problem, it will materialize 1, 2, 10 years down the line, maybe never. You're never going to be called upon as a valuer to own up to any mistakes that you've made. But in this case, the bank will make a decision. They will repossess the asset, or they will put it on the market within a matter of months. And then if they don't get the amount of money that you told them they will turn around to you and say, hold on a minute, mate. You told me it's worth 10 million. Nobody's even coming close to that. They're coming in at 6. What are you doing here?
So let's move on to where the bank then decides that they want to dispose of these non-performing loans and the assets underpinning them as well, which they've ended up recovering and seize it and owning a big portfolio of assets and debts as well. And so what happens? This is the other route out of to recover some money.
Sure. So effectively at that point in time, what happens is that the bank has probably set up a division of this type. This is what usually happens. So most banks would end up setting up a restructuring division with a real estate team and whatever, which is a hodgepodge of a mixture of bankers and external consultants and new hires. And what you end up typically having is that division end up somehow being spun off into what they're called loan servicers. So they service the loans. Effectively, they manage the loans, right? So and examples of this, in a way, Nama in Ireland was an example of that. It was state-backed. So you have two sides to the coin. You have the owner of the loans and of the real estate, and then you have the people who manage the loans and the real estate. So if we take Nama as an example, what you had was the government of Ireland bought the NPLs and the distressed real estate, and then they put them under the management of Nama.
So these kind of state recovery, these have been quite common in a banking crisis. But really, what I'm trying to get to is the selling off of these loans to investors.
Yeah. So what you end up having there? So this is like step one, not step one, but it's usually the bank will try and spin this thing off. Now there are many ways to sell off the loans or transfer the problem somewhere else. Usually they will try and package the loans up by characteristics and geography, obviously. So you could end up having credit card debt in Poland, or car loans in Bulgaria, holiday homes in Spain, or it's usually these types of portfolios that come out. I mean, if you are lucky, you get I don't know, hotels in the south of France, and you are loving doing the underwriting for that. But you end up with these clusterings of portfolios coming onto the market. And then the people who will, so this is like the first way to do it. And the second is securitization, which we can talk about in a bit. But so these portfolios come out on the market, and you have a range of buyers. So you have, first of all, you have the really big institutions who are interested in these portfolios. Now we're talking about companies like PIMCO, who have 1.9 trillion under management. You have companies like Apollo that have 400 billion under management. Davison Kepner, who has 45 million. You have these are big investors, usually who manage the funds of either pension funds out of the U.S., but also state funds. So the Dubai Investment Authority would invest in these companies, who in turn would acquire the loans.
What would you say that they're buying? Are they buying the real estate? Are they buying the loans? I'm trying to get a sense of the relativity here. What are they most interested in? Are they interested in the real estate assets, or the possibility of recovering and getting loan repayments?
Yeah, the easy answer for me is to say both. Now, what everybody is, and this is where the discount rate comes into play, and that I hope will help answer the question. So these companies are looking at returns well in excess of 12-13%, right? Which in this environment means that obviously they are very high compared to everywhere else. I mean, if you think about negative interest rates or whatever, these guys are looking at pretty high returns in the mid-teens. In certain cases, this is for real estate-backed non-performing loans. For non-real estate-backed NPLs, so this is for, let's say, loans that are backed by cars or which is unsecured credit, you are looking in the low to mid-20s. So very high discount rates. Now, and the reason for that is the risk that they take in not recovering, obviously, the amount of money they put in. So they will buy the loans at a discount, and I'll explain what that is. So what matters to them more is speed rather than the absolute amount. I mean, the absolute amount matters, but when you are dealing with discount rates of, let's call it 50%, 15% plus, speed begins to matter more than the absolute amount you're going to take out of selling the asset or getting your loan back. So if the asset is worth 100, but you're going to get it in 2 years' time, and you're working off a 15% discount rate, you're happy to get 90 or 85 now, rather than wait for that 100 to come in 2 years' time.
And I think just in terms of the assets, and maybe you could say a little bit more about the different types of investors as well. But
sure.
I assume that in terms of the assets that they've got here, that they're basically looking for an exit strategy, and they have to do some asset management before they exit.
Sure.
Sometimes or sometimes not. And it's really about the nature of the asset management that's required to get from buying the loan and getting the underlying real estate as part of that loan, and then exiting, and what kind of asset management they have to engage in to do that.
Sure. So on the asset management side, effectively, I would split this into, let's call it 3 parts. So you have the loan side, the real estate side, and a gray zone that sits in between the two worlds. Now, in a servicing platform, all 3 are obviously together under the same umbrella. So once the asset is transferred out of the banking institution, the sole purpose of that servicer, of the people working for that servicer, is to get the money. They're debt collectors, effectively. Nobody likes to say that, but that's what the servicer is. So they are obviously more aggressive. They can be more aggressive because you don't have a brand that you need to protect, or what are people going to say? I mean, you're a debt collector. You don't really have an image that you want to uphold. If anything, you have a bad image. So you have you're sitting opposite the various companies, and you are able to negotiate more freely than a bank in that you are the governance over and the regulatory environment over which you operate is a bit more relaxed. So you can write off more loans, you can come up with some more ingenious ways of how to restructure them, but also you can play hardball more by bringing in more lawyers or more accountants or coming up with different ideas on how to go after the debtor. That's the loan side.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to get a sense of what they have to do to the real estate to get it from.
Sure. So the real estate on the real estate side, effectively the borrower would turn around and say, okay, here are my assets, take my assets, and write off my loan or part of my loan, and we're sort of done. At that point in time, the real estate team will, or before that, this is the gray zone, we would step in and turn around and say, okay, these are good assets, we actually want these we want, but first of all, the borrower needs to resolve these issues. So maybe they need to vacate the building, or they need to get the town planning permit before we get them, and whatever. So you try and filter a bit the assets that you're going to get and manage them before you actually are the owner of these properties. Once you do get them, you end up with a huge array of assets. So in my previous position, we ended up having 1.5 billion of real estate, which comprised of more than 3,500 properties. Now, we had anything from a golf course, which was obviously incomplete, up to properties that were under 10 euro. 10 euro is like what? £8 for £8.5 for a single asset, which was some half a square meter left over by like rubbish, total rubbish, and you have to manage the whole array. Now, so at that point in time, the way to picture it is: imagine you're walking down the road and you have a beautiful, great environment. You have a row of houses, and there's one house that has been abandoned for years and is sort of falling apart. That's the type of asset. 9 out of 10 times, that's the asset that ends up in these real estate teams that they have to manage. This is the 1.5 billion that you have to work with. So in that case, what are you going to do? You have the company workforce turning around and saying, look, 15% returns, we need our money quickly. And then you have your real estate side that is saying, well, hold on a minute, guys. Actually, I think that if I spend money in this and I refurbish it, I can turn it around and I can make a profit. And that's where things begin to sort of, is a tension between what the company wants and what you as a real estate person wants to do. So what they effectively boils down to is, can you get this thing sold as quickly as possible rather than for as much money as possible? So in that case, what we would end up doing is we would literally send in cleaners to clean this thing, maybe give it a lick of paint, and that's a big maybe, and then push it out to agents to sell it. Now, in a great environment,
so you have to manage. Sorry, just to be. Yeah. So you have to be someone who manages the transaction process and the disposal process, as well as doing any interventions that you might do before you sell it.
Yeah, we do. I mean, these teams, and I'm saying, sorry, I use the word we because I've set up and managed 3 of them until now for 3 different institutions. You end up with what you do. You have what is called the onboarding or the acquisition team, where you're not actually acquiring the assets, the real estate by choice. These are the stuff that is being given to you, or you're getting dumped upon would be a better expression. So
it's not a choice. You just
get a choice. Like, these are the assets, make it work. Okay, so you're like I said. So those are the people who take these assets, and then they will start collecting information about them, the permits, what they even are. In many cases you don't know because the loan was given 30 years ago. There are no files. There's nothing. So you have that's one side. Then you have your hardcore asset management team who are there to make the big decisions, where each person there will have a portfolio that they're managing, either commercial or residential or land. You have a lot of land in this portfolio, or some specialists.
I'm trying to think of the type of things that you might come up against, and it sounds like classic active management, where you might have to change the lease, change the tenant, find tenants, improve the building, refurbish the building, or to some degree, or complete an unfinished project.
Unfinished building, evictions. You have to deal with evictions because quite often, if the borrower wasn't playing ball with the loan management team, you end up repossessing the asset, but the previous borrower is still there. So because possession and ownership don't go together. So possession, so you're not a registered owner, but you still need to evict the person who is sitting in there. You have fraudulent leases, and also you have everybody in the neighborhood. Not everybody. I'm exaggerating here. Coming and saying, okay, Mr. Big Bucks has this asset now, so we want all the common charges paid up for all these years. We are going to sue you because you haven't been maintaining your building well enough. We're going to so you have that bit to deal with as well.
Arrears as well.
Arrears on everything. Nobody has maintained anything, so you end up with that. I think it's important here to, you do end up with everything. You end up, as I said, golf courses, hotels, which have the nice stuff, commercial units, great, and you are really saying, okay, this isn't distressed at all. And then when you go down to actually dealing with random plots of land and kicking people out of houses or industrial units that are derelict, that's when the problems begin. And that's where the challenge begins and the fun part begins, when you need to turn these things around quickly, right? Quickly is the key thing here, and push them out to market. Now, I think the bit to bear in mind is, most people think of Wolf of Wall Street sort of scenarios where, Suits, where Spectre walks in and says, we're going to sue them, and within half an hour he's taken over the company and everything is amazing and stuff like that. You have, the beauty of Europe, which of course you're no longer part of, but the beauty of Europe is all these different jurisdictions, legal jurisdictions, where the laws don't apply in the same way, or the legal framework isn't even there, and where you also do not have the necessary infrastructure to actually do this thing. Nobody has done it before, so you actually have to fly in, set up these things for the first time.
Skill set. When you say infrastructure, that skill set that to do these jobs, the people who are experts at the asset management, for instance, just don't exist.
They don't exist. It's the same way that I was a valuer with an affinity for numbers, and I got trained to become effectively an asset manager, doing this type of asset management, which is little bit developing, little bit selling, little bit of everything, because of the range of assets that I have to deal with. Now, the funny thing is that I've been doing this for the last 8 years, and I'm probably one of the most experienced people in the local market because I was one of the first ones to start. So this whole industry didn't exist in Cyprus. And let's take Greece, which is a much bigger market. And just to give you a sense, we're talking about 19-20 billion of non-performing loans, real estate-related non-performing loans in Cyprus, and around 80 billion of real estate non-performing loans in Greece. So you're talking about pretty big markets in the wider context of when we talk about what this thing is. In Greece, they've only been dealing with this type of problems in the last year, 2 years. And so the expertise isn't there.
And it's been massive throughout Europe, with following the global financial crisis as well. The large private equity groups coming in and buying large portfolios from the banks.
Correct. Effectively, what is happening is, and it's interesting you mentioned the banking system, because there's a shift now also at the European level, because the logic of 6-7 years ago or 8 years ago was move the loans into the hands of private equity investors, of third parties, get them out of the banking system in that way, and let's move on. This hasn't been happening fast enough in certain jurisdictions, right? Obviously the UK and to extend Ireland are the exceptions to the rule. Northern Europe also is quite good at this because they had the crisis of the mid-90s, early to mid-90s to deal with. But for the Southern European countries, they haven't dealt with something like this before. So actually now, on the back of, let's say, the lack of success of what has been happening until now, but also COVID, the push now is more for state-backed entities to take up the role of cleaning up the non-performing loans in the banking system.
So having worked yourself in a sort of traditional institutions, what I would call traditional in the UK context, although it's probably a very oversimplification to say that because they've changed so much, but working for institutions that hold good quality assets,
yeah,
and moving towards having to manage a very different quality of asset, a lower quality of asset, how would you compare the skills and the task that you need, the role that you need to play as an asset manager?
Sure. So let's say I can actually give you tangible examples. When I was in London, I used to work for AXA at some point for one of their listed European funds. Okay, great. So there were 2-3 of us there working for the fund. We had a small number of assets. I think it was around 10 listed on AIM. So, my role, and we had mainly malls. We had a couple of malls across Western Europe, logistics, and we had 1 or 2 offices. Okay, that was great. I mean, they were fully let. I think we had like a small vacancy. So my job as the fund analyst at the time, reporting to the fund manager, was basically to make sure by talking to the accountant, to the fund accountant, that we had actually received the rents. Talk to the local property managers guys and say, okay, what are you doing with marketing that specific space that we have for rent? That was really my job. And then, kicking the tires to any new opportunities that came in. So it was more of a routine, let's say, job with not necessarily a lot of problem solving involved, mainly drawn out meetings where we sort of talked about things, if I can call it that. Here,
just monitoring the assets and the performance and.
Yeah, I mean, okay, they are there. Okay, there's much you can do to it. So, okay, at the time, it was great. I mean, it was great, listed, amazing. We were going around. Okay, beautiful. When you progressively move to this side where it's more problems. I mean, you have, as I said, you have thousands of assets, hundreds of tenants. So, okay, somebody could turn around and say, well, that means more work. Well, yeah, it's more work, but also what it means is because nobody is looking to you for perfection, it means that, and everybody's looking for you to do something. So it's more do it and do it quickly and do it fast. It's like almost working for a car wash, if I can call it that. So it's working for a car wash rather than, I don't know, doing detailing, cleaning up the car, very well, and everybody really caring about what you do. So
yeah, I think I was saying for a valeting service.
Valeting service. Thank you very much. So and this is the good thing, because let's go back to the example that I mentioned earlier with the house. Okay, if you are dealing with one house out of 10 that you own, obviously you want to do a great job with that one house, because if you get it wrong, everybody's going to know. Did you get as close to what the valuer said the value should be? Blah blah blah, whatever. Was everything done correctly? Did you follow due process? Now, when you are dealing with 100 houses, which you need to get to the market quickly and get them sold quickly, nobody really cares if everything is done to perfection. Now, that doesn't mean that you get to cut corners and not do your job, but it basically means as long as you get more things right than you get them wrong, you're sort of fine. So what makes this more exciting is that you get to make a lot more decisions every day about what needs to be done. But also because speed is so important, you actually see it happen. I mean, one of the things that frustrated me was that, we sit down, you're sitting in somewhere in the West End, you make the decision to, build something or do something, and it takes 2-3 years for whatever you decided to actually materialize. Here is weeks, if not days, where things happen. It's the speed that changes things.
Because of the exit strategy, the return drivers. The longer it takes, the lower the return.
Correct. So, nobody's sitting there and saying, okay, instead of $500,000, we could have gotten 520, but it would have taken us 6 months longer. Nobody would ever ask that question. Now, if there's a big mistake, yeah, of course, questions will be asked, but it's all about speed.
And do you have any particular? I'm trying to think of something that people can relate to, a mall or a commercial building or something where you can remember having worked on, and what you've done to it, just to give a sense of the kind of things that you've done, whether it's improved the building or got rid of tenants or attracted tenants or upgraded.
Sure. So I can tell you about the development site here in Nicosia. So what we had was smack down in the center of the city. We had a beautiful site on which it was an old branch, a bank branch that was sitting there for a number of years. The bank had it at its books at the site value at 10 million, which at the time was significantly overvalued because what was happening in the local economy. We got approached by a developer who offered us 6 million. The bank couldn't take the hit. I mean, they didn't have the 4 million to lose. It was impossible. So what we did there was we agreed with the developer what the gross development value of the project he was planning to do would be. And then we turned around and said, okay, we think our side, being the bank side, we think that you're being too pessimistic. So what we're going to do, we're going to do 3 things. Number one, what we're going to do, we're going to sign the agreement to sell you the land at 6 million, plus a ratcheting, a profit sharing, or in this case, a revenue sharing mechanism above the gross development value, which he had no reason to object, because if he thought he was going to make at the time, it was something like 30 million gross development value, anything above that, basically we started getting a cut. The second thing we did was we had to pay.
We would call that overage here. We call that an overage agreement.
Overage agreement. Okay. The second thing we did was, instead of him paying us the full amount up front, they paid 1 million, and then the rest of the money was paid once the building permit was issued. So that obviously saved him money in terms of interest and all these things. And then the third thing that we did was the bank financed, obviously they financed the development. So if you think about it in the bank context, they were giving good loans out. So when you have the ratio of how many non-performing loans do you have, you take the number of non-performing loans and you divide it by the number of performing plus non-performing. So in that constant context, we help the bank as a real estate team to give out that loan.
So it sounds like there's a lot more creativity and entrepreneurialism, easy for me to say, entrepreneurialism required in these kind of situations.
Well, let me give you a follow-on to actually what happened with this guy. So actually what happened was that we caught the market, or he caught the market going up. So about 1.5 years down the line, he came back to us and said, look, you guys are making all the profit here. I mean, this thing is far more successful than I thought it would ever be. I want to buy you out. So what we did was, because clearly, and I know this sounds a bit strange, because our aim wasn't to get money. Our aim was to sell even more real estate. So what we turned around and said, we said, okay, how about we sell you some more land, which you will pick. So he picked a very nice, a very nice commercial land site, which we sold to him. And then we said, okay, we'll sell you that. We know you're getting a good deal on that. So actually, we're not being compensated for buying out the overage. So we said to him, you need to buy at least 1 million of assets, which we will pick for you, right? So we went and we found 130 properties in like the ones I described, the €1, 500 euro, 1,000, 10,000, whatever. So a lot of the rubbish that we had sitting around, and we sold them to him, right? So he bought us out of the overage, so he was happy. We got rid of 130 assets that actually nobody would buy, plus the one good one. So in a way, we used the upside that we made on the first deal to finance the second deal and help the bank get rid of as many assets as possible. These are the type of things that you need to be doing. That's why it's a bit more, you have so many assets and you have so many problems. And the push for speed is there. So you are you are forced to make a lot of decisions. You can't sit around and just monitor the situation. It's like saying, I'm running the emergency ward in a hospital and saying, I'm monitoring the situation. What are you monitoring? People are falling apart. There's things that need to happen. You can't be sitting around in your office saying, I'm filling in a form.
Okay, I'm just going to, in the last 5 minutes, so I get the impression from previous conversations with you that you think that this is something that's going to be, there's going to be opportunities or problems in this area once we start to emerge from the pandemic, and the underlying financial solvency of some of the businesses and the properties crystallizes. Is that a reasonable?
Yeah. I think look, there's two sides. Let's before being specific to your question, I think being able as a skill set, being able to not monitor situations or write a great report or build an amazing model, being able to actually manage and solve a problem practically, I think that's a skill set that is valuable in general. So I would advise, let's say, somebody to put themselves in this position where they actually have to solve problems other than think that they're solving something by putting a report together or building an amazing model with sensitivities and whatever. So that's sort of one. I think in where we are right now, I think what has happened. Basically, what you have is right at the point in time where Southeastern Europe, Spain, Italy, Greece, whatever, Cyprus, started coming, or let's say begin to resolve their problems. This second wave of COVID came in. Now, what COVID has done, and I'm no expert on the long-term impact, but let's say there are three parts. One is how it has affected tourism, how it has affected or will affect the office market, and how it has or will affect the retail market. Now, so what do you have? Retail, I think everybody can see what's happening with the malls. They can see what's happening with the with high street retail, and this is across the board. So what's going to happen not only to the high street retail, but to secondary retail destinations? I mean, are we going to turn them into offices? Are we going to turn them into residential units? How do we repurpose? How do we reuse this space? Are people going to go back to the office? And what offices do people want to go back to? I mean, it's quite funny. People want to go back to the office. Many people want to go back because they're fed up at home, or more likely fed up with their kids or wives or husbands or partners. We're flexible here. So they're fed up. So they want to go back to the office, but not as much as they did before. But at the same time, when they do go back to the office, they want a different office environment. They want better quality buildings, better ventilation, less touching on buttons and stuff like that. So you have technology that needs to play a part there.
But do you think there's going to be more opportunity in the NPL sector, and who will be the people who will be the organizations or the investors who will be part of that market? Do you think?
Sure. Okay. So what you have right now is you have the low yield environment continues. I appreciate that recently there is an uptick in inflation, and long-term bond yields in the U.S. have started creeping up, but still above 1%. There's a lot of money sloshing around, both in the banking system, but also there's a savings increase, and there's a lot of money basically around. All this money is looking for yield, and they're looking for some form of return. Now, you can buy a long-term income-producing asset and say, okay, this is how I'm making my return. Great. But more likely what you're going to do, you're progressively being forced into areas or sectors where there's more risk, there are more problems, and there's more things that need to be done in order for you to generate the type of returns that you would be happy with. That's why what you have is you have these organizations that I mentioned before, PIMCO, Fortress, Apollo, Bain, these big players, U.S., mainly U.S., private equity firms that have moved into the NPL and distressed real estate sector. They started with Western Europe. They're moving into Southern Europe, and they are going to, they're buying up even more delinquent portfolios, so portfolios of loans that somebody hasn't paid, hasn't made a payment for more than 10, 15 years. So they are going into those sectors. But when you think about where do these companies raise their money from, it's pension funds and sovereign funds, right? So what do you have? You have the same sovereign fund that directly or indirectly acquires a prime asset in Paris or in Frankfurt. Realize that it's not sustainable for them to make 4, 5, 6% returns. They need to move up the risk curve. They need to move into investing money in alternative ways. So they go to these companies, these big institutions, these private equity players, or other forms of hedge funds, or mezzanine financing, or whatever it is, the shadow banking system, effectively, and that's how they get their yield. So the big sovereigns are moving the money into this sector through these vehicles, and that's why I think the opportunities are there as that liquidity finds its way towards this bit of the wider market that is out there.
That gets transmitted all the way down to someone like you or other asset managers, then having to do deals with the developer to overage arrangements and those creative solutions that you have to come up with at an asset level.
Sure.
That pattern.
Sure, because the thing is, it's fine to. It's great to be able to say, I'm solving the problem at the high level, but then it needs to trickle down to, you buy, let's say there's a recent transaction, actually recent, it only was announced 2 days ago. So this is what, on the 23rd of February. So what you have there is a securitization of 10.8 billion of non-performing loans in Greece. Taking place between Alpha Bank, one of the largest banks in Greece, and an investment fund out of the US called Davidson Kepner. Now, there what you have is, as I said, 10.8 billion of non-performing loans. So, Alpha Bank has sort of solved these problems by through this structure, which we can go into, of course. But at the same time, there's a whole team, hundreds of people, thousands of people that now need to go through each and every case, each and every asset, and actually, get the money in. And this is part of the problem. You move, the problem is then solved until the money comes back in, and this is part of the thing. So, in this case, Alpha Bank has moved part of the problem out of the bank and on to Davidson Kepner, or actually the owners of the bonds. But then for these guys to actually get their money, somebody, as I said, needs to go to whatever Greek island there's that field, get that field sold, find the neighbor, tell them it's a good deal, get it sold, get the money, and then make the payments. And this is how everything needs to happen for the rest of the 750 or whatever it is billion of non-performing loans in the European banking system to be cleaned up. And this is before we even start talking about COVID-related problems and COVID-related loans. It's a huge sector that is sort of sitting there, which nobody's really thinking about. But if you think about it, it actually needs to be there. Somebody needs to clean up the mess. Okay, well,
we've been going on for quite a while now, so I'm going to call it a day there. And I'm sure we could go on for much, much longer and talk about especially that specific deal that you just ended on, which is really good. Because really topical as well and up to date, and seeing how those huge corporate finance transactions then get operationalized through down to the nitty-gritty level. It's been really good to hear all that. So thanks very much, Pavlos, and I'm sure we we could hear a lot more about it. So I'm gonna cut you off there and stop.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
We can have a chat afterwards.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Pat.